When you set out to know what it truly means to be Igbo, you will meet the fact that Igbo always faces the problem of attracting both hatred and love at the same time from mostly the same persons. Our theme this Friday is Know Your Roots. The title of today's episode is Igbo, Admired Yet Resented, the truth about the hatred and admiration of Igbo. My inspiration for today's topic is drawn from a very tough and beautiful woman who happens to be my mother. On the 7th day of March 2024, I went to see my mother at my ancestral home. My conversations with her, as usual, centered on my children who are her grandchildren and my grandchildren who are her great-grandchildren. I have once more failed to bring them home to visit her, and she was not happy. To make up for my failings, I promised to take a video message from her to all the children. Now, listen to what she said.
My message to them.
Yes.
English and Igbo. Do in English.
Easy good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Mama. Oh, my gosh. Ndilan Seba. Oh, we're all around the hill. Oh, I have a
Okay.
Oh, no, one. The hand them.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, you been here. That's an yabo. Oh, my pen. Cadeva, my pen, the matter.
Okay.
Cadeva, I got the matter.
You see?
Is a failure.
Okay.
To you people, not to you children. Because by anunso, ono maro munon, maro munon, maro bono, handa maro.
Okay.
Another thing, I want to make guitar me bugo okay. You show up in Nigeria, and they are not sick. Because can you have any guys?
Yeah.
Which is very bad statement and very poor to us.
So,
I'm not jumping.
okay, what can I do? Okay.
Also, I'm going to you. So, what I want from you, children, come nearer and know everything. And ask your father and your mothers to show you the place and to walk to their place. So that when your father or your mother is old, you can guide him as they are guiding you now. You cannot know it during the old age. You will know it by now.
Yeah.
And face it, and practice, and do it so that you will. That's my message to you.
Fantastic.
My mother's message clearly applies to every Igbo child. The message underlines the importance of knowing your roots and finding out what it really means to be Igbo. When you set out to know what it truly means to be Igbo, you will meet the fact that Igbo always faces the problem of attracting both hatred and love at the same time from mostly the same persons. This is what most persons have come to call the Igbo problem, a love-hate phenomenon which literally every Igbo experiences at one point or the other in life. During the Transatlantic slave trade, the slave trader had the Igbo problem. He loved and hated the Igbo slave. All through the spread of Christianity in Igboland, the early Christian missionary had Igbo problem. He loved and hated the Igbo convert. During the colonization of Nigeria, the colonial officer had the Igbo problem. He loved and hated the Igbo colonial citizen. From the independence of Nigeria till date, Nigerians have the Igbo problem. They love and hate the Igbo citizen. Even in the Igbo themselves have the Igbo problem. While Nigerians are complaining that Ndigbo only love themselves, Umuigbo are complaining that Igbos hate one another. So, what is this Igbo problem? Why does the Igbo problem happen over and over again? What has Igbo done to attract both admiration and resentment from the same source at the same period? The answers to these questions will give us the key to understanding the magic of being Igbo. So, join me. Let's dive in and find the answers. We begin by examining the first time Umuigbo lived with other races. It was during the European colonialism of the 15th century and the racist labeling of people based on non-existent skin colors in the 17th century. European traders, missionaries, and colonists declared themselves white, superior, civilized, and declared Africans black, inferior, and barbaric. Together, all the Europeans set up a legal, financial, and operational system to dominate, control, exploit Africans using the transatlantic slave trade, the spread of Christianity, and the establishment of colonies. In this evil system, the Christian missionaries provided cultural and educational support. The European traders facilitated economic exploitation, and the colonists enforced political control. Together, the three groups became a wicked gang. Sir Henry Johnson emphasized the wicked collaboration in the following words: missionaries strengthen our hold over the country. They spread the use of the English language. They induct natives into the best kind of civilization. And in fact, each mission station is an essay in colonialism. It all began with the transatlantic slave trade, which provided a framework of laws and social norms, selling human beings as commodities. This system violently tore men and women away from their loved ones, transported them across the Atlantic Ocean as goods, not human beings, but goods, and sent them to work by force on the plantations and slave houses in the Americas. Transatlantic slave trade took Umuigbo out of their homes and forced them for the very first time to live and mix with other ethnic, tribal, and racial groups. Umuigbo was the most admired, most valued, and most sought after slave of the transatlantic trade. The slave trader admired and sought after the Igbo for their physical strength, environmental adaptability, strong entrepreneurship, mental capacity to learn new skills, and moral resilience to endure tough times. About 15 million Africans were forced into slavery in the Americas. And Umuigbo, who were transported through the Bight of Biafra, were 1.7 million, almost 11%, giving Ndigbo the highest number of any ethnic group forced into slavery in the Americas. Now, in spite of being the most admired and sought after slave, Umuigbo rejected slavery and resisted it at every opportunity. One of the classic stories of early resistance to slavery was in 1803, when a group of Igbo captives, estimated to be around 75, rose up against their captors on a ship off the coast of St. Simon Island, Georgia. After gaining control of the ship, they marched ashore and walked into the marshy waters of Dunbar Creek, committing mass suicide. Ndigbo resisted slavery through constant rebellion and for being difficult to handle and prone to suicide. Slave traders resented the Igbo for resisting slavery. And so, for the very first time in their history, Umuigbo faced the paradox of being admired and yet resented. The Igbo problem was born at this period. The transatlantic slave trade had a three key aspects that gives us insight into the Igbo problem. One, Ndigbo, for material gain, worked with the European slave trader to kidnap and sell Umuigbo into slavery. The slave traders both admired, sought after, and also resented the Igbo slave. Some Igbo slaves resisted slavery till death, while others adapted and made use of the opportunity they found in slavery The question then is, if Ndigbo hated transatlantic slave trade to the point of death, why did they participate in selling their own kids and kin into the same slave trade? The most remarkable event of the transatlantic slave trade occurred in 1789, when an Igbo slave, Olaudah Equiano, published his autobiography, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano. It was the first book that provided first-hand insight into the terrors and the inhumane transactions of slave trade, with a brutal and destructive impact on individuals and societies. The book became a bestseller, which shaped public opinion against slavery in Britain. Olaudah Equiano, through personal transformation, converted to Christianity, educated himself, bought his freedom, and became a leading voice in the British abolitionist movement. He lectured extensively, wrote letters to influential figures, advocated and supported campaigns to abolish the slave trade. At the end, the work of this Umuigbo, who hated slavery but endured it, significantly contributed to the passage of the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807. At the end, the Igbo defeated slavery. Now, let us turn our attention to the work of the early Christian missionaries in Igboland. 25 years after the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, illegal trade on slaves between local and European traffickers continued to exist. To bring an effective end to slavery, Thomas Badsen, in his book, The African Slave Trade and Its Remedy, proposed the Niger expedition designed to achieve the following. 1. Work with African chiefs to prohibit slave trade and promote trade agreements that will offer African slave suppliers alternative legitimate trade and commerce with Europe. Introduce Christianity as a moral, civilizing, and social transformation force for African societies. Develop Africa's natural human resources as new markets and new opportunities for European nations. The Niger expedition took off in 1841 with the following mandate from the British Crown, that the Queen and the people of England profess the Christian religion, and that by this religion they are commanded to assist in promoting goodwill, peace, and brotherly love among all nations and men, and that in endeavoring to commence a further intercourse with the African nations, Her Majesty are actuated and guided by these Christian principles. Ndigbo received the Niger expedition without resistance, but treated the Christian message with caution and peculiar complexity. For nearly 60 years, Ndigbo refused to see any value in the message of the European missionaries and maintained strong attachment to their traditional religion and practices. The European missionaries then were forced to reoffer Christianity as a key to understanding European languages and secrets, which gives access to colonial influence, education, and modernization. Additionally, they brought freed Africans as familiar faces to help them reach out to the Igbo population in reoffering the message of Christianity. Ndigbo became attracted to this new message, delivered by fellow Africans, and quickly adopted Christianity. The Igbo conversion to Christianity skyrocketed, and the missionaries loved and admired the rapid uptake and functionality of the Igbo converts. More missionary groups arrived in Igboland with more mission resources to build more schools, more hospitals, more skill centers, more churches across Igboland. European investors followed the mission success with more commercial ventures, more funding, more roads, more bridges, more logistics and communication infrastructure. Slowly but steadily, Ndigbo, who benefited from education, began to assert their knowledge and to display competence and willingness to take over roles originally designed for the European missionaries. Ndigbo also began to emulate European lifestyles, take correspondence courses beyond the control of the missionaries, promote independent thinking, and demand for rights and privileges. Now, instead of abandoning their traditional practices, which the missionaries called barbaric, Ndigbo began to adapt Christianity to Igbo traditions and culture. A good number of Igbo converts who have risen in the ranks of mission leadership began also to take up missionary responsibility and to establish local missions. The rapid growth of Igbo converts and the Igbo display of authenticity started affecting power dynamics in the mission, frustrate the missionary authorities, and build European missionary resentment for the Igbo converts. The Igbo problem has again arrived in the mission. The admiration and resentment of the Igbos by the European missionary is best seen in the contradictory opinions about Ndigbo expressed by Reverend D.D. Badsen. D.D. Badsen, in one breath, wrote that Ndigbo have clearly defined standards of etiquette, meaning that the Igbo traditional society was run by a set of clear standards of appropriate behavior. Then, in another breath, the same D.D. Badsen wrote that the Igbo person is of an impatient temperament, lacks determination and perseverance, and is more or less untrustworthy. Can you believe it? It is clear that D.D. Badsen was definitely very frustrated and confused about the Igbo personality. So, in dealing with the missionary, you can see that Ndigbo displayed a similar trait they manifested in dealing with slave trade. Some Igbo people resisted the Christian missionaries. Another set of Ndigbo collaborated with the missionaries to settle Christianity down in Igboland. Now, among those who collaborated and got converted, most became known for their strong Christian faith, became missionaries themselves, and began spreading Christianity across Igboland. They also started successfully to integrate Igbo cultural practices with Christianity, including translating the Bible to Igbo language. They excelled in leadership roles within the churches. Those churches that evangelized Igboland, contributing seriously to church work and growth, administration, both locally and internationally. The Igbo attitude to the missionary experience is best summarized by Akunna in his dialogue with Mr. Brown, a missionary, in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Akunna said to the missionary, "You, the missionary, you say that there is one supreme God who made heaven and earth. But we, the Igbo, we also call him Chukwu. He made all the world and other gods." So, the Igbo basically saw little difference between Christianity and the Igbo traditional worship. They welcomed the opportunity which being a Christian offered and grabbed them with both hands. The great successes of Cardinal Francis Arinze as a global missionary, like the work of Olaudah Equiano as a global abolitionist, are testaments to the magic of being Igbo. The Igbo personality has proven to often gather strength when Igbo resentment is delivered in the midst of Igbo admiration. Now, let us examine the problems the colonies had with establishing colonial administration in Igboland. The colonies were designed to provide the political and economic framework for creating new markets for European goods and exploiting the African population for taxes and cheap raw materials. Frederick Lugard, in his work, The Dual Mandate in British Tropical Africa, lied that Britain had a duty to establish colonies in order to enhance the welfare of the African people and to exploit African resources for the betterment of humanity. To achieve this grand theft, Lugard advocated for indirect rule a system where British officials governed through existing local rulers and institutions. Professor Fort noted at the onset, the Africanists in British Foreign Office and Colonial Office advised Lord Lugard and his team that out of the legion of African ethnic groups they studied, Ndigbo were the least encumbered with any cultural baggage. They warned them that the Igbos come light and go light with the baggage of culture. Now, other colonial officers like Hugh Crow described Ndigbo as being of an honest and engaging disposition with a deep sense of communalism. While for people like Mr. J. Adams, Ndigbo have a strong sense of dignity in their preference for death over enslavement. Reports from many missionaries working in Igboland assured the colonial officers that Igbo were quick to embrace Western education and are equipped with positive threats for modernization and development. They pointed to the entrepreneurial skills, industrious and resourceful lifestyle of Ndigbo, which showed a rare ability to thrive in challenging environments. At the economic front, Ndigbo, who gained economic opportunities, began to conserve wealth, grow investments, build their own institutions, and take up social investments in their communities. Igbo-owned businesses, logistic companies, lending institutions, and schools began to emerge, to grow, and to compete for opportunities and partnerships. The days of Olaudah Equiano Transport Company West African Limited and Okonkwo and Sons Limited had arrived. Most colonial officers admired these great attributes and provided Ndigbo with employment and enterprise opportunity in the colonial system of Nigeria. Ndigbo, who took up the opportunities, were delivering excellent services to the missionary, the European trader, and the colonial government. The colonialists, however, piled pressure on Ndigbo to abandon their traditional cultures and adopt European values and institutions. Now, in response to this pressure to adopt European values, Ndigbo continued to demonstrate their readiness to embrace modernity and also to grow economic opportunities, but maintained a strong cultural identity. Now, the Igbo refusal to abandon their traditional lifestyle and values began to frustrate the European and to draw a barrage of resentment from the colonial officers. The Igbo problem, again, had finally arrived, pulled ashore by the following reasons. 1. Ndigbo had no form of centralized authority structure, making it very difficult for the British to impose indirect rule or win acceptance for the warrant chiefs they appointed. Edward M. Falk, colonial officer, described Igbo as lacking institutions and culturally backward when compared to the Yoruba and the Hausa. While frustrated colonial officials viewed Ndigbo as lawless or disorganized, the British Colonial Office concluded that Ndigbo were difficult to convince, difficult to lead, arrogant, snobbish, and always acting above their social status. The Igbo resistance to centralized authority became manifested in the following active rebellions against colonial policies. 1. The Umuigbo movement of 1883 to 1914. It was a 31-year series of guerrilla uprisings against a British colonial rule in Anioma. The Anglo-Arab War of 1901 to 1902, a 3-year battle of resistance against colonial rule. The Aba Women's Riot of 1929, Igbo women protesting against British taxation and the use of warrant chiefs. Now, frustrated by all this, Lord Lugard described the Igbos as fiercely rebellious with no regard for authority, and noted that they were highly dangerous to be trusted with power. In the face of this paradox of admiration and resentment, one Igbo son rose up with outstanding eloquence to demand for independence and the end of colonial rule, not just for Nigeria, but the whole of Africa. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, the Zik of Africa, declared, "I am becoming convinced day by day that a new Africa is destined to become a reality. No force under the heavens can stem it." And so, like Olaudah Equiano did with slavery before him, as Francis Cardinal Rinze is still doing with the Christian mission, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe worked with other competitors to push the Nigerian independence to the finish line and became Nigeria's first president. And to all Igbos, he left a permanent advice on the magic of being Igbo. And he said to them, "Let us no longer quake or doubt our capacity to enter into our rightful heritage." So the question now is, when and how will Ndigbo overcome the Igbo problem and enter their rightful heritage? To explore these answers to this question, we will now review the problems the Igbos are having with the current day Nigeria. I remain your host, Chinua. I'm urging you to subscribe to our channel, like, and share our videos till our next episode. Thank you and goodbye.